Well, at the same time, the City Press is reporting that the SANDF is battling budget cuts. It also announced that the promotion of colonels and Navy captains was being put on hold indefinitely. Military Specialist Professor Abel Esterhuyse joins us for more on the story. Prof, good evening. Thanks for your time. So we've been talking about cuts to the military for a number of years now. In fact, a lot of the efficiencies around the military, their ability to keep up some of their key equipment has been sometimes blamed on the fact that we have these budget cuts. Let's talk about what then the latest austerity measures that are affecting government as a whole, the impact of that on the military.
Yeah, can I just say, I think there's two arguments here. The one argument is that the defense budget is too small, and that, the international sort of benchmark is 2% of the defense budget, or 2% of GDP that ought to go to defense. But let's be honest, I mean, there ain't more money on the national budget for defense. I mean, that's a reality. The defense force are not going to, or is not going to get more money. So the second argument, and this is a very, very important argument, is how will the defense force adjust themselves structurally to bring themselves as an organization in line with the current defense budget. And that's the critical element, I think, in the current debate about the defense budget. The defense force is pointing fingers at government not providing sufficient funds in the defense budget, but at the same time, there's a huge question hanging over the defense force in terms of how the defense force has structurally adjust themselves to the realities of the defense budget. And that reality is, unfortunately, I think, are not going to change over time and in the future.
One of the places that has been identified potentially for cuts has been that of salaries, and just a view that perhaps the military has been overspending on its salaries. Do you support that view?
Well, the military don't determine its own salaries. The military is paying their personnel in terms of the state personnel guidelines on the remuneration of personnel working for the state. So that's not going to change. You cannot, the defense force cannot on its own adjust the salaries that it is paying to its people. So the question then is, how do you change that salary bill, and how do you make the changes to these salaries? And I think the obvious answer here is looking at the structure of the defense force. And let's be honest about the structure of the defense force. We are sitting with a mushroom type defense force, with a Pretoria army or a corporate army in Pretoria that is way too big for the size of the deployable operational army and operational footprint we have. And the problem here is that the bureaucratic army in Pretoria is not going to manage themselves smaller. They're not going to cut the number of generals that are working at Defence HQ, and that is precisely what ought to happen here.
Let's talk about the unauthorized expenditure that the military incurs, because that figure, of course, is sitting quite high up, especially when you look at sort of some of the latest financial statements to the tune of just over 6 billion rand. It's not small money at all.
Yeah, it's not a sustainable situation that the Defence Force is dealing with. The problem is that you're running into next year's budget if you don't properly manage this year's budget. So the Defence Force, we all know, it's a general fact. We all know that they are sitting with personnel problems, that they are overspending on personnel. But we have to look at the makeup of that personnel, and that is precisely where the problem is. They're not necessarily overpaying the people at grassroots level, but it's a case of the balance in the defense force that's not right. And the top structure that is simply too heavy for what they have at grassroots level.
Do you believe that with the current budget that the SANDF receives, including some of the track record in terms of how they actually spend this money and sometimes the shortfalls that they fall into, do you believe that they're still standing true to their mandate and are still able to deliver on that core mandate?
Well, the problem is that normally defense budgets are divided in more or less equal parts between personnel expenditure, capital expenditure, and then, of course, operations. And the reality is that the more you're spending on personnel, the less money sort of is available for operations and for the expanding technology requirements in the Department of Defense. And let's be honest, if we talk about the technology and we look what is on parade every year, it is more or less what was on parade in 1994. So not much have changed in terms of the technological makeup in the defense force in the last 30 years. If you then go to the operational side of the defense force, there's simply a situation of overstretch. We are sitting with a huge deployment in managing the borders at the moment, a deployment in Mozambique, deployments in the DRC Congo. It is not sustainable. The operational budget is not sustainable in view of the personnel expenditures of the defense force. So we need to find a way to bring balance back into the defense force.
So Prof, what would be your advice then? Cut down on the size in terms of the personnel in the SANDF, but I'm also hearing you say reduce the number of missions that they're actively part of.
Well, I think they will probably have to tweak on all levels in terms of operations. I mean, we do not have the budget to sustain the operations that we are currently conducting. That's the first point. But I think that problem to a large extent is rooted in the percentage of money that we are at the moment spending on personnel. And so if we go to the personnel budget, the challenge is not the number of people we have within the defense force. The challenge is that those people are employed at the wrong levels. And we have too many people at the top end of the defense establishment. They are receiving huge amounts of money. I mean, you're paying a general the same amount of money that will allow you to employ quite a number of people at the level of troop level. So, and that's the problem. We need to right size, if I can use that word, the personnel establishment in the defense force, and that has not been done in the last 30 years. This is a legacy issue.
Prof. Esterhuyse, it sounds to me that at least the kind of change that you're speaking about and advocating for is the kind that politicians will immediately run away from, because once you start touching, including some of these personnel that are high up in the military, it's just perhaps may become a political hot potato that they could well be wanting to avoid.
Well, that is precisely, I think, what it is. The moment you start talking about personnel, right-sizing, downsizing, it becomes a political issue, not only a political issue in the sense that you have party or political military relations realities unfolding, but also political in the sense that you need political will to cut down on the personnel establishment of the defense force. And if that political will is not forthcoming, you're going to have trouble cutting down on the personnel establishment of the Defence Force.
All right. Military Specialist Professor Abel Esterhuyse, thanks for your time tonight.